Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Scriptor Joe over here, and welcome back to another episode of this tutorial series making you a new Roblox scripter fledgling. Last episode we talked about C-frames and orientation. In this episode we are going to talk about what services are and how we can use them. We will also introduce the Workspace and Player services, so follow along if you are interested in any of the terms I mentioned. So let's start by asking the question, what are services? Services are, as the name suggests, useful things provided to you by the Roblox Studio IDE to help you meet a certain demand or achieve a certain goal using methods or properties that they have. Like instances, services can have their own properties, methods, and events useful for different applications. Services are the direct children of the game instance, so you have to reference them by starting with its ancestry of game. So game dot the workspace name, and can be either hidden or shown in the Explorer interface shown over here. The IDE displays the most common services in the Explorer interface. These are the Workspace, Players, Lighting, Material Service, Replicated First, Replicated Storage, Server Script Service, Server Storage, Starter GUI, Starter Pack, Starter Player, Teams, Sound Service, and Text Chat Service services. A total of 14 services. To reference a service in your script, you start by typing in game, and either dot and the name of the service you want, such as Workspace, or you use a method called the getService method. So to reference a method of your game instance, you add a colon and then you type in the method name, which is getService, and in the input you type in the name of the service you want as a string. So for example, the Workspace service, we type it in as a string. Now, it is more reliable to use the getService method because it waits for the service to load in the game before referencing it. If typing in the whole game statement and method to get the service each time you use it seems impractical, you can just save the return service as a variable like we did with the part instance we created in the previous videos. For example, let's create a variable, name it WKS, and set it to the game getService workspace returned item. So game getService workspace returns the workspace service, and we set it to the variable named WKS. Now this works the same way as you can call or reference its properties and methods using this variable. For example, let's use the method raycast, which we will talk about more in a later video, which returns a raycast result. Now everything that appears in your game, such as models and parts, is always parented to the Workspace service, which appears in your game over here. The Workspace service acts as a storage of all the things you want to appear in your game. That is not the only application of the service, however. You can use the Workspace service, for example, to change the gravity applied on parts by changing its gravity property in the Properties interface. For example, let's change the gravity property to 2000. This makes you jump lower when you jump, for example. The maximum seems to be 1000. That's why I set it to 1000 when I changed it to 2000. But that makes the player, when he joins the game, jump to a lower height. If we make it, for example, a lower value, such as, for example, 50, it makes the player jump a higher height. So less gravity is applied on the player when it's lower, and a higher amount of gravity is applied when the value is higher. You can also use the Workspace service to change the wind velocity of your game using the GlobalWind property in the Properties interface. This is a Vector 3 property and allows you to change the velocity of the wind in your game, such as the direction and speed. This affects how the grass and clouds in your game look and move. You can also use methods that are useful to create data types such as raycast results, which we talked about impromptu. So this is a method that allows you to create a raycast result, which we will talk about in a later video. The Workspace service is mostly used to reference parts and models in your game or to add them as a visible object. We have been using the Workspace lately to add parts to our game. The Player service is used to reference the players in your game. It also tracks the players that leave and join using events, which allows you to create certain functions such as saving data or adding player stats at those moments of time. For example, in our script, let's save the player service using the getService method to a variable named PLS. So local PLS equals game getService players as a string. And then let's use one of its events, which is PlayerAdded. So PLS.PlayerAdded. Let's make a separation between them. PLS.PlayerAdded, and let's connect it to a function that we create using local function and name that function to added. Now let's add an input with the name of player, which is of the player class. To tell the computer that this input is of the player class, we use a colon and the class name. We added this player input since the PlayerAdded event adds the player that joins the game as an input to the function it connects to, which in this case would be the added function. But for now, let's just tell the computer to print us. So let's close this function and tell the computer to print us the user ID of this player when he joins. User ID. So whenever a player joins the game, the computer prints the user ID in the output interface. The player class or instance has many properties which are useful for certain aspects or certain systems that you want to create. One of these properties is the user ID property. This is usually used for data store, for the data store service, which we will talk about later, which is used to store data. So if we connect this event to the added function and we run the game without pressing play, so let's just run the game, which just runs the game without making us join the game, so no players were added to the player service, we can see that nothing was printed out. However, if we play and join the game, we can see since a player joins the game and is added to the player service, we can see how you can see how the user or the player user ID was printed out in the output interface. As you can see, a player was added to the player service since we played the game. In the next episode, we will talk more about the lighting and the material service, so stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed this learning experience, and if you want to continue, be sure to watch the next video. If you want to stop here, just save your progress by pressing File, Save to File, and then name the file whatever you want and save it wherever you wish. Be sure to support the channel by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or inquiries, feel free to ask in the comments section.